my country, the United Kingdom, we've actually just had a loneliness commission which involved a number of different national organisations, including one that I have the privilege of chairing, Carers UK, which advised government on how to develop a strategy for tackling loneliness, in which actually the government has just responded to publish the loneliness strategy and has appointed the first ever minister to tackle loneliness. So I think that point about how you create cities where people don't feel lonely is really important. The point also about affordable housing, and that's not just obviously for the so-called fast emerging economy cities and mega cities, but it's also some of the old world cities. So in London, for example, again, huge issues around how the teachers, police officers, firemen and women find affordable housing which is within reasonable distance of where they go to work. So it's some really important points for us to chew on some further. Christopher, I apologise, I didn't explain to everybody, hopefully it's clear from the bios in the programme, that Christopher is part of our home team here from the Asian Institute of Management because he's the head of school. I think a relatively new school of innovation and technology and entrepreneurship.
Few months old.
So you are most welcome. So let's hear from your perspective about what's going to make these sustainable smart cities in the 21st century.
Thank you, David. Actually, Ayesha gave a very good introduction to what I'm going to say. And to put things in perspective, I was hired by the Singapore government 7 years ago to model this Smart Nation initiative. They requested me to lead a team referred to as a complex systems team under the government's think tank, A-STAR, Agency for Science, Technology and Research, to understand what are the ingredients of a smart city and how can you use this to help government agencies and industries in Singapore to remain competitive. So prior to coming to AIM, that was my job, really looking at smart cities. So to augment or to add to this discussion, probably I would first like to reiterate to everyone that cities is all about people. Smart cities, livable cities, great cities, the most important ingredient is that it will be able to fulfill the potential, the aspirations of its people. So that's one of my first working equation. Second, okay, I would like to reiterate what you mentioned at the opening of this discussion, that eventually everyone will be living in cities. In 1950, 30% of the populations are staying in cities. In 2009, that was the first time when there are more urban dwellers than rural folks. In 2030, there will be 60% of the population in cities. 2070, 70%. 2090, 80%. 10% addition every 2 decades, essentially. By the turn of the 21st century, almost everyone will be living in cities. So that is again another given. And I think that is a very important equation if we would like the future to be reimagined, because that is the future. Now this makes sense from the perspective of the economy of scale. It's a very simple idea, economy of scale. Energy, transportation, basic utilities will be cheaper in a densely populated area compared to a dispersed rural area. But the challenge is, and this is the challenge that we realize by understanding the science of cities, is that a simple understanding of this scalability probably will not work to understand city dynamics. And now let me wear the hat of being a professor here and tell you what are the important dynamics of cities. It's all about interaction. 4 things. Cities is a complex system. It is defined by many agents that are strongly interacting, 1. And their strong interaction is actually non-linear and non-reductionist. Think of crowd dynamics, for example. Third, this non-linearity will lead to behavior that cannot be understood by simply looking at the individual components. The whole is not merely more, but completely different from the sum of its part. And finally, As a result of this interaction, cities will never go into equilibrium. They will constantly evolve, they will constantly change. Now, why am I saying this? If I have to describe cities of the future, the only word that actually accurately, and you can validate this empirically, is that eventually the cities of the future will be connected. And when the cities of the future is connected, I would like to emphasize this very important point. I think, or arguably, the biggest misconceptions in the conventional views of cities and city structures is that most of the way we define them follows what is referred to as a bell curve or a normal distribution. That you can define it in terms of averages. When we plan cities, we look at averages. But one thing that we learn, if we try to use these four variables, these four dynamics that I mentioned, is that most of the infrastructure in cities are not bell curve, not normally distributed. They follow what is referred to as a power law distribution. It is some sort of a Pareto law distribution. 80% of the wealth will be created by only 20% of the individual. If you look at the transportation, 80% of the used transport points is only caused by 20% of the infrastructure. If you look at universities, which is at the core of any developed cities, the reputation of any given university is given or defined only by 5 to 10% of its faculty. If you look at for example, publications, the best journals, okay, which is roughly the proxy for creation of wealth, it is only given by or defined by 5 to 10% of those articles that were written on it. Now, I would like to use this to go to my final point. With this understanding, with this perspective, okay, one thing that power law will tell us mathematically, and I will not prove it in this hall, is this, okay, this. That the future, if you want to predict the future, power law has a very mathematically profound implication. If you would like to predict the future, you have to look at all the variables from the past. And second, the city. Okay, you have to understand the dynamics of every part of this location, because whatever happens in one location will impact the whole. The term in physics for this one is long-range interaction. The term in city dynamics is long-range interaction. And in that note, I would like to tell you this, that that is the curse and the strength of cities, connectivity. If there is a part of that city that is not good, that doesn't feel that they belong to the city, cities evolve in such a manner that that particular feeling will be propagated efficiently to the entire city. And that is why I believe the idea of inclusive growth is very important to maintain the stability of cities.
Again, thank you very much. And I think that question about do we feel physically safe in cities, goes back to one of the themes of the last session about security. I remember being in Johannesburg in South Africa 20 plus years ago, when there was real concerns about whether you could even walk through the CBD, the Central Business District. And so there's a really big effort by the business community working with the elected authorities to try to make that CBD a place that was more of a destination place rather than a place that you took a car even for 1 or 2 blocks rather than down the street. But obviously a lot of businesses have as their primary markets cities. I mean, Uber would be a classic example today. Do you see some businesses that you think are really grabbing some of the new opportunities from this rapid urbanization that's taking place that you think we could all learn from? And you are allowed to say Ayala group of companies if you like that. Who would like to kick this off? Who thinks that they've got a good example of a business that is really seizing the opportunities from rapid urbanisation?
Allow me to first answer your first question about the concept of safety on the cities. One of, again, the interesting idea about term that I mentioned, power law distribution, is that if you have this kind of distribution, it is generally robust to random fluctuation. But if you have targeted the hubs, the critical points, it can cause a catastrophic reaction. And this is the idea of cities. Now, one of the businesses that I feel will be useful in this kind of environment are those that will be able to make somehow a very adaptive and at the same a very fast way of forecasting what will be the next the future. Actually, I am somehow connected to the two speakers here. I've been in Singapore for more than 6 years. And at the same time, we will have some projects with Ayala on the concept of urbanization, which I think is a very important thing. Trying to understand wealth mobility, trying to understand population mobility at the same time. And I believe any business that can make use of those information, be it banks, be it real estate, okay, will thrive in this type of cities.
Thank you.
Well, I think that there's so much opportunities if you're thinking just at the city level, let alone at the business level. Obviously, logistics and transportation, which causes so much pain and stress and loss of productivity, is one area, which is why we've seen Gojek and Uber and Grab and all DD come up, Mobike come up in China. But there are lots of others. I mean, if you think about sustainability, we'll see many more solar panels and other kinds of sustainable ways of powering our houses, our offices, so that's a business that could come up. Even in terms of police and safety, companies such as SenseTime, which has just raised $600 million in China, and its facial recognition systems are in all the cameras and even in many of the apps used by the Chinese. So I think there are many applications of this once one starts, but those are just a smattering of them.
I think in general, scale, agglomeration, and densities correspond very neatly with the size and the type of markets. So in many ways, if you look at the sizes of these cities, you can almost predict what kinds and levels of products and commodities are more likely to be feasible. And that is something that is fairly robust. It goes with the way cities, the essence of cities is really, well, is density. Because without density, you don't have any city. Density is what allowed division of labor, specialization to flourish, and so that it's leading to all these scientific advances. So you look at the densities, you look at the scale, and that gives you a clue right away what types of markets are going to be feasible. And there's and that's something that we've looked at constantly through the decades. And I would say that more or less we've been relatively successful.
Great, thank you. Now, we agreed as a panel that there's a lot of work to be done in thinking about what should a 21st century city be like. But we're not selfish as a group up here, so we want everyone to help us. So will you please, for the next 3-4 minutes, close your laptops, close your phones or whatever, and just turn to something close around you that you've not yet taught in. And what, for you, should a 21st century city be like? So, quick fire, turn to something you've not spoken to. What should a 21st century city be like, please? And just to warn you, I'm going to come and pick on some people to give us some answers. So, ladies and